The Big Ten is back as the talk of college football, taking center stage at Media Days in Vegas this week. And we go from the pinnacle of talking season right to the football field in August camp. But first, we let the coaches and the players speak for the programs this week. And this is the relaunch of our Big Ten Live Show. We will call it the Big Ten Live Show. It is back and better than ever because we got this guy right next to me, Corey Bratta from the Hawkeye of the Storm, talking Iowa football and Iowa athletics every day on From the Hawkeye of the Storm. Corey, I've been trying to drag you in to do this with me for quite some time, and I finally succeeded.
Hey, I've always loved what you did on the national scene and with Big Ten. You're a Big Ten guy at heart, as am I. We come from two very different perspectives, and I think there's going to be some weeks, and I don't know if we're going to probably won't get to that this week just because it's media days. But I shared a couple ideas with you prior to going live. I think the fascinating thing about you and I is because you come from a different part of the country, you have different experience, but we share the commonality that is Big Ten football. And I think maybe some of our memories and the things, our perspectives on the sport and on the conference and on realignment are all different. That can be really powerful. So hopefully we can make that a integral part of what we're doing here. And I know we're going to get some perspectives from some other people. You got people down at Big Ten Media Days right now who will be reporting back. And so, yeah, it's going to be fun here over the next few weeks as we count down the days to week 0. The first game is a Big Ten game, correct? What game is that?
The first game of the college football season is a Big 12 game.
Big 12, Iowa State. Yeah. How can I miss that? Iowa State, it's at Kansas State?
Yes.
Over in Ireland, correct?
Farmageddon,
Ireland style.
A bigger rivalry than you had ever imagined, Corey. Yeah, you found that out a couple weeks ago.
It's so big we had to move it to Ireland. We had to move it to Ireland. Oh.
All right, everyone. Remember that our first conversation, our first barb on this Big Ten Live Show was delivered by Corey against the Big 12, making fun of the Big 12 and its rivalries.
No, I think it's great.
All right, we'll get into it right now. We got Marty Leap joining us, formerly of Penn State rivals, breaking down the Nittany Lions. Of course, James Franklin and the crew is headed to Vegas here in a few days. Marty, appreciate you being here. Oh, we can't hear you.
So it helps if I mute myself, but yes, no, it's always exciting this time of year to actually finally start to have some real football to talk about.
We got the blue theme going on here. Look at this. There's blue everywhere, Mark. Everybody hit the memo on this one, even StreamYard.
It's a Big Ten color.
Yeah, it is a Big Ten
so
color.
Let's do it. Marty, I guess I'll lead this off, and Corey and I can tag team back and forth on this one with Penn State, of course, being at the top of the rankings. But I'm going to take an Iowa lean on this because we were going to have you on the Iowa show because The Athletic posted, and Corey and I just somewhat alluded to it a minute ago, the top 100 rivalries in college football. And the one rivalry I did not anticipate seeing on there was Iowa and Penn State. And it was ranked rather high. And that obviously has nothing to do with geography or anything that is expected to be between these two schools, but playing a series of exciting games and important games. And I will leave out the last game when I use the term exciting, but not that one, but the other ones certainly over the past 20 or 25 years. So that one was surprising to me that it popped up on that list.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I do think a lot of it's just it does seem to be close games when Penn State and Iowa play for the most part. I mean, right, you think back to 2017, the walk-off touchdown to Juwan Johnson, Iowa storming back in 2021 after Sean Clifford gets hurt. I mean, I know this is a bit of a deep cut for Penn State fans, but 2008, that loss at Iowa probably cost them a national championship, at least a trip to the game. And, when you talk about exciting football, nothing gets better than 6-4, where Iowa purposely was taking a safety at the end of the game because they knew Penn State had no ability to go down and offensively score a touchdown.
It's such an Iowa thing to do,
so
right, Mark?
They knew the way to do it was purposely take a safety and force Penn State to drive 50 yards because they knew they couldn't do it. It was more likely to score a defensive touchdown. But no, and I do think, too, in recent years, the rivalry in wrestling, I'm sure with a lot of fans, that's going to kind of spill over to some extent because you have the bad blood there. But yeah, no, that is a bit surprising to me. But like you said, it seems typically, last one aside, the whiteout game a few years ago that was just completely one-sided, to be exciting, close games that come down to the end, usually a gut-wrenching loss for one or other team. So I'm sure that has as much to do with it as anything.
Yeah, and typically, as you know, Marty, if this game is one-sided, it's typically Penn State blowing out Iowa. I mean,
Yes.
that it wasn't just the game a couple of years ago; it was also the game in 2016.
Yes.
Because people will remember that they actually forget that game because the very next week was when Iowa came out and beat a top 5 Michigan team. It was just one of the crazier 1-week turnarounds you've ever seen. And let's not forget, if we're talking about this series, that 2008 game was the start of a stretch where Iowa really owned Joe Pa teams, and those were good Penn State teams. From 2008 to 2009, they beat them 3 times.
Yeah, in that 2009 year, Penn State won 11-2, and one of those 2 losses was in the whiteout against Iowa. That was the Adrian Claiborne blocked punt game. So that was
a beautiful block punt, by the way.
Yeah,
2008, 2010, my bad.
Perfectly executed. But it was wild there for a little while, kind of, and even go back a little bit further, even 2002, when Penn State was a really good team, ranked in the top 10. And the Iowa game, the Brad Banks year, where, that game had a lot to do with college football getting instant replay. I remember the game, the sight of Paterno sprinting down the sidelines to just go give a referee unholy hell over a missed call. But it's and I think that's part of it too, is like you said, Corey, it's not just that they're close games, but a lot of times it's an even series. Iowa has had, a lot of success in the series. Honestly, I don't know without looking it up, but just going off the top of my head, I would assume since Penn State's joined the Big Ten, other than Ohio State and Michigan, no team has beaten them more than Iowa in terms of Big Ten foes. I don't know that for certain, but just based off of my memory of things, I would feel confident in saying that. But I think that's a big part of it.
One thing we should probably talk about at some point, and I don't want to make this too Iowa Penn State heavy because this is our first Big Ten show, Mark, but that series, Marty, Iowa Penn State, it's been from an Iowa perspective. If you go back and trace, and I'd love to just go back and literally trace it out. It's one of those games where it gives no indicator typically of what Iowa is going to do even the very next week.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we gave an example of 2016. They get absolutely thrashed in a whiteout of Penn State and then come back and be a top 5 Michigan team. But how about 2017? I mean, you talk a really low scoring affair against Penn State, but let's not forget, what was it, a week or 2 prior, Iowa played Iowa State. Those 2 teams combined for like 85 points. And you come back and you barely beat, you barely lose in a game where these 2 teams combined for 32 points. So, or whatever it was. So, it's fascinating. 2010, when that season started to slide, because that was a really good win for Iowa as well. I remember the Sean Prater pick 6 in that game.
Mm-hmm.
And the 6-4 game you brought up. And I'm not, I don't know, as I get a little bit older, I start to lose recency, like memory of like the last 3 seasons get cloudier and cloudier, Mark. I don't know if you get this way. You seem to just be like a machine with so many different things. So I'm guessing you don't have this issue, but I remember dates further back better than I do in the last 2 to 3 years. But the game, the whiteout on CBS, Marty, was that 2 years ago now?
Yeah, it was 2 years. It was 23.
And last year they didn't play them, right?
They did not play each other, correct.
So, yeah, I mean, and that was that game 2 years ago. That was the game, I believe, where Cade went. No, it was not the game where Cade went down the next game against Michigan State. Cade played that game against Penn State, was not totally healthy.
No.
But
the first play of the game, he hit Eric All for
a
25-yard game.
Massive.
And Iowa literally had like 30 yards the rest of the game. I think they may have had close to more yards on the first play from scrimmage than they did the rest of the game.
But he fumbled. Yeah.
He
fumbled. It was a massive play. They were in scoring territory, and they would go on to not score.
Yep.
Like,
it was very Iowa.
It was one of those things, Mark, people rip on me, especially the fans of the other teams, don't like it when I say things like this. But the reality is, if you watch Iowa and you know how Kirk operates and how these teams operate, Marty, I'll say it again, even though that Penn State team was miles better than Iowa 2 years ago, had Eric All not fumbled the ball down the stretch in that first drive, we don't know how the rest of the game would have played out. Now, Mark's going to sit here and argue the better team was Penn State. The better team was Penn State. What I'm saying is Iowa wins games they're not supposed to win by doing just that, scoring early and then figuring out a way to just keep it close to the rest of the game. But when you turn the ball over, on the first possession or two of the game, especially when you're in scoring territory. I think it just changed the complexion of the game totally. And it was a run. Now, it was pretty close at halftime. It was 10-0, which I kind of laugh. I remember laughing at that, Mark, because Kirk said something after the game about how he felt pretty good at halftime because it was just 10-0. I'm like, how do you feel good when you got 0 on the board? But he did. It's Kirk. He felt good at 10-0, and then it got away from him in the second half.
And that's why I'm chuckling, because I remember our conversation after the game and probably 3 times since then when you've made that exact point, and I'm like,
you don't have to agree with it. I'm just telling. I've seen it so many times.
I get the premise there, but a lot would have had to keep going their way for the rest of the night.
But can we agree there are plays that change the complexion of games? Then that's
Absolutely.
a drastic change in complexion.
I mean, I'll go back to that 2008 game when Darryl Clark gets hit and gets a concussion. If that doesn't happen, I don't think Iowa wins that game. Penn State was up by 10 at the time, and Clark tried to gut it through because this is back when concussions weren't taken as seriously as they are now. And he was just helpless the rest of that game. And, like you said, that one play, even if they switch quarterbacks, I think Penn State probably hangs on there. But
if we're going to be objective fans, if in 2021, if Sean Clifford doesn't go down,
yeah,
I mean, it's hard looking back because that's the other one that I didn't bring up. You talk about how that game is not usually an indicator about what Iowa's going to do the very next week. How about what Iowa did the very next week after beating Penn State in 2021? They're top 5 in the country, and they go home and get thrashed at home against Purdue, unranked Purdue. There's another example of that game not meaning much of anything for the next week. It's really strange how that happens.
Yeah, but that's when if Clifford doesn't get hurt, I think that.
I probably agree with you. At the time, I was
Yearsich was coaching circles around Phil Parker that day.
Yeah, it was rough with what's his face, the kid that transferred to UConn. What was his name? The backup.
Roberson literally could not get snap off.
Take one. Yeah, he couldn't hear it. He couldn't hear the cadence.
Literally couldn't.
He couldn't hear each other. Yeah, interesting.
And he's somewhere this year.
Is he still in college?
Yeah,
good.
He's still hanging around.
And I can't remember where. I just read this the other day.
How old is that guy? He wasn't even.
He's at Kansas State now. So to circle back to the conversation at the beginning of Farmageddon, maybe he'll make an appearance.
Is he going to play? Is he in line to start there, Mark?
Well, no. Avery Johnson.
No, you'd think he'd go. You'd think he'd want to go somewhere to start.
Well, if he couldn't start at UConn consistently, then I don't know where he was going to go.
Well, fair enough.
He might be the one transfer where what his degree is actually matters.
Yeah. Can I just real quickly bring this up? Thank you to Tom Caker at HawkeyeReport.com. I want to switch gears from Iowa for just a minute. Iowa, Penn State. A few notes. I want to give a quote here, Mark, from Tony Petiti, right? Am I pronouncing his last name correctly?
Yes.
I think it's the first time I've ever actually said the guy's last name. So he was quoted today during his opening remarks. This is an intriguing one, and one that I think would be an interesting conversation for this show, Mark. Would the Big Ten consider going back to 8 conference games? So you and I have talked about the inequity that's created because the SEC plays 8, the Big Ten plays 9. And this is what Tony said. Don't care about how many conference games are played, but when you expand at large, then it's about how you compete during conference season. Would he consider more at-large teams? Need to try and get the selection process right and make it easier for the committee. Thinks the committee does a great job. If it's a specific allocation, then it doesn't matter how many conference games someone plays. So I don't know how much of that you agree with. But that's a conversation you and I have had about this is the Big Ten layout in the past.
Well, I just recorded Michigan podcast with Steve Dace, and that turned out to be like 3/4 of our conversation. He hit on the playoff model, and we strongly disagree on the best playoff model. And he likes this 4-4-2-2-1-3 business. And I just don't see
4-2-3-3-1.
4-4.
You might have to explain that one.
Okay, you got 4 for the Big Ten, 4 for the SEC, 2 for the ACC, 2 for the Big 12, 1 group of 5, 3 at large.
Okay, what don't you like about that?
I don't like that we're predetermining playoff spots before the season starts, before anybody has scored a point.
Then how do you resolve inequity across the Power 4? I just called it earlier in the last show. I said we call it Power 4, but it
at least let it play out. Let it play out on the field, and then let reasonable people make a decision on what teams earned playoff spots.
The problem is, can human beings be reasonable when they're looking at records across multiple conferences against different competition? I think that's probably the issue that arises when you don't preset
I get that because I'm not a proponent of a committee myself. I would build an objective playoff system is what I would do. However, we have had a committee for 11 years and they have not made any egregious errors. None. Zero. For as much as I don't like a committee, they've made some calls like Penn State, Ohio State 2016, where there's a conversation on both. Yeah, they've had to make difficult decisions, but anyone would, or even an objective system would leave out a team that we would argue and say, well, they might be better than the number 4. So they've had to make a few decisions like that, but they haven't made egregious errors. And so we've trusted them this far, and we still have this non-objective system regardless. They're still going to be in play in this 4-4-2-2-1-3 deal. They're still going to be making some selections.
Right, but I guess my issue, and I don't know what Dace's argument for that. I mean, this is the first time I've heard that proposal in that terminology before, Mark. But I guess there's still 3 at-larges. So I think if I'm reading what he's describing correctly, the Big 12 and ACC would still be eligible for those 3 at-large spots.
Yes.
I think the idea is there's going to be very few years where there's more than 7 teams collectively from those 2 conferences that deserve a spot in the 12-team playoff. Yeah, is that fair to say? You're getting 4 teams in the Big 10 and 4 teams in the SEC. If there's teams
At
that
least.
are okay, and if there are teams that are from the ACC and the Big 12 that are just better than those lower tier, there's the bottom 2 teams from each of those conferences, the SEC and the Big 10, that deserve spots, then they'll get at-large spots. I think that's the premise here, correct?
That is the premise. The other issue I have with it is if you are taking the top 4 teams from the Big 10 and you are using the Big 10 standings, those aren't necessarily the 4 best teams in the Big 10.
Well, who's using the Big 10 standings?
That's what I'm understanding, is that they would use the standings because there are going to be 4 teams from the Big 10, so you would use the Big 10 standings because that's more objective than factoring in non-conference games.
Well, yeah.
Correct?
The problem is until you can create equal conferences and equal schedules, you really can never rely on conference standings. You just can't. Right? Am I right
And
or
you
wrong?
can't rely on non-conference games because those are definitely not equal.
Correct. Yeah, that's true. That's true. That's what. Yeah, exactly. When you're trying to weigh 130 plus FBS teams for 12 spots,
yeah,
you can't play everybody. So,
well, Marty, since we have you here for a limited period of time and we want to talk Penn State, and the only Penn State we've talked about is 2008 and 2021, is we're going to talk about 2025 because from what I understand, it's supposed to be a pretty good year for Penn State football. That's what I'm hearing on the streets. I see a lot of number 1s and 2s next to Penn State in preseason publications. So you got to feel pretty good about this team, although there have been guys like Tyler Warren and Abdul Carter and a few others lost.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people are going to point naturally to 2017 as the last time there was this much legitimate preseason hype around the Nittany Lions. But honestly, I think you got to go back to 99 when they were preseason number 1. Were number 1 most of the year, started 9-0, and then imploded down the stretch and lost their last 3. To when there was, this much legitimate faith and train of thought that, hey, they could win a national championship this year. I've said all offseason going into the year, if I was making my preseason top 25, I would not have them lower than 2. I'd either go Penn State 1, Texas 2, or vice versa. I mean, sure, this team's not perfect, but this is not a year where you have some of the Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State Death Star level teams we've seen of the past decade or so. And, you look at Penn State and you look at what they bring back, you can make an argument this is going to be the best offensive line in the country. Drew Aller has maybe as much arm talent and ability as any quarterback in the country. Now, as we've said on here all offseason, Drew needs to take a step this year. And I think he'll get much better wide receiver play this year, which can help with that. And yes, losing Tyler Warren is going to be tough on this offense, but I think people need to not pigeonhole themselves into thinking who is that one singular player that's going to replace Tyler Warren, because you're not going to do that. He was a generational player here, legitimately one of the best players in program history, but the tight end room is still very deep. You have an incredible stable of running backs. I mean, you could argue you have the best 1-2 punch of running back in the country as well. I think you're going to see the running backs, especially Nick Singleton, using the pass game a lot more this year. And I think with the offense as well, it's year 2 of Andy Kotelnicki. And you know how it is with any scheme offensively or defensively. When you get to year 2, especially year 2 of an offense where you have a returning quarterback, right, your entire offensive line's back, you can really open up the playbook a bit more because guys are just more comfortable. They know things. So I think we're going to see that too. And then on defense, I mean, yeah, you lose Abdul Carter, and that was a big blow. But outside of Abdul Carter and some guys at defensive tackle, you didn't really lose a lot. And, even at defensive tackle, they lost some of their depth pieces, but Zane Durant was the best defensive tackle on this team last year, and he's back. Alfonso Ford was the second best defensive tackle on this team last year, and he's back. So, I think defensively, you may have some depth concerns at some spots, but you feel really good about your top 2 everywhere. Again, like I said, in my opinion, I think this is the best chance preseason they've had at a national championship since 1999. I think the hype is warranted. I think this team is very talented. They're very good. I'm certainly not going to sit here and predict them to win a national championship by any means, but I'm not going to be surprised at all if, they can pull it off. And for the first time since 1986, they do manage to emerge from the chaos as national champions.
So real quick, I want to ask you about the schedule in a second here, Marty, but quick trivia question for everybody on the screen here. What was Andy Kotelnicki's first job as a coach? Anybody know? First collegiate job.
Was it with Leipold, the Whitewater, or was it before that?
No.
Or are you going back to like GA days?
I'm talking, yeah. No, not GA. I'm sorry. You know what? You're right. No, you're absolutely right. Wisconsin
I was thinking full-time coaching position.
So I'm talking D1. Wisconsin River Falls. He was a student offensive line coach during his senior year. But I'm talking after that. No, his first job was he was an offensive assistant for Don Patterson, Mark.
Oh.
At Western Illinois. Yeah.
Very good.
So Don has a lot of admiration for Andy Kotelnicki. He was actually a guy that was tossed around like when we were talking about offensive coordinators, and he was, Kotelnicki was just tearing it up at Kansas. He was a guy I was like, man, bring him to Iowa. Don, make a call, right? But as far as Penn State's schedule is concerned, Marty, they have a pretty balanced one. I mean, I look through it and I'm like, I wouldn't say it's easy, wouldn't say it's hard. I mean, you have a real litmus test early against Oregon. You got the Ohio State game, but the rest is pretty manageable. To me, that's exactly what you want. I don't think there's going to be many years and many schedules that you could possibly draw where your schedule is going to work against you in a playoff consideration setting. But I think they're as balanced as they need to be. I do think it'll be interesting to see what that Oregon Penn State game has to be the game in September, maybe nationally. I could be wrong on that, Mark. You know the national scale better than I do. Penn State's non-conference schedule is incredibly weak.
Yes.
And you can tell us why is that, Marty? It seems like that's a theme with a lot of Big Ten schools. They're just starting to schedule on the 3 games. They just choose not to schedule Power 4 opponents anymore.
Yeah, I think so. Because, I mean, if you look at Penn State, this is actually the first season in quite a while they haven't had a challenging, or at least on paper, challenging non-con. Because you had WVU the last 2 years. 2 years prior to that, you had home and away with Auburn. Now, part of it is you had a home and away schedule with Virginia Tech. And one of those games, the game in Blacksburg, was supposed to be 2020. Obviously, that did not get played. I could be wrong, but I think this was the year was supposed to be the return trip to Happy Valley, and that's how Villanova wound up on the schedule. Don't quote me on that. I could be wrong, but I do know the Virginia Tech home and home fell apart. And even before that, they had 4 years with Pitt. So this actually is the first year, COVID year aside, when there was no non-conference games. They haven't had a Power 4 non-conference opponent in quite a while. But yeah, if you look at the schedule, I think in a lot of ways it sets up really well for Penn State because you mentioned that Oregon game. Now, you mentioned nationally, Penn State and Oregon is the same kickoff time as Alabama, Georgia. So that's going to be one hell of a Saturday night of college football. I am already very excited for it. But, if you're Penn State, you get that game at home. It's the whiteout. It's going to be under the lights. Dante Moore's first road start. You have a lot working in your favor already. And you have a bye week before that. And as you mentioned, Corey, the 3 opponents before that bye week are, teams you're going to plaster. So you have a great runway to that game. Get healthy from camp injuries. Get healthy for guys who are recovering from off-season surgery. New guys that need the reps, get them lots of reps early in those games. Get depth pieces, a lot of reps. So that sets up really well. But also, you dig a little bit deeper. So the week after Oregon, you go to UCLA. And not that I expect UCLA to give them many problems, but that's a tough turnaround to play in Pasadena on a Saturday. Will they come back home that next weekend and play Northwestern? No knock on Northwestern, but that's a team you probably can get away with if you kind of sleepwalk through the first half. And then after their trip to Iowa, they have a bye week between going to Kinnick Stadium and going to Columbus. And I think that bye week in there is massive because no matter what happens when they play at Iowa, they're going to come out of that game physically beat up because it's Iowa. That's what they're going to do to you, right? And then you're going to have that week of recovery before Ohio State. You essentially get an extra week to game plan for that trip to Columbus. So I think some of the little quirks on the schedule like that, even like I said, having a bye week before Oregon, having a bye week after Iowa and before Ohio State, playing Northwestern the week after you have to go to the West Coast to play UCLA. Little things like that sometimes may get overlooked, I think also are very important on this schedule because I think if you're Penn State now, in the era of the 12-team playoff, if Penn State goes 10-2 at this schedule, they're almost assuredly going to be in the playoff. But I think if you're a Penn State fan, it's reasonable to be disappointed if you don't win at least 11 regular season games this year. I think that Oregon game, that's one you got to get it. It's at home, as I said, after a bye, whiteout, Dante Moore's first road start. They replace a lot. That's one I think if you're James Franklin, you got to have that one because if you don't, and you're sitting there at 3-1, by no means is your season over if you're 3-1 with a loss against a top 10 team, but you're going to start to hear the chirping about Franklin and Penn State and the big games, and it's going to weigh on you until you go to Columbus. It's going to weigh on you when you go to Kinnick a few weeks later, right? So I think that's one they absolutely have to get.
I think, honestly, I do agree with you that there are a couple of games on the schedule that are going to mean a lot more because of the non-conference schedule. You don't have an opportunity to cash in on a big win early. Like if they lose, if they go 10-2 and their two losses are Ohio State and Oregon, Mark, a 10-2 Penn State team, potentially, like I'm looking through this, who else is a top 25 team on that schedule?
You better hope Indiana doesn't.
Indiana?
Now, I think one thing that I think will work in their favor there potentially, I don't think talent-wise, Nebraska's a top 25 team. Well, if you look at Nebraska's schedule, they could come rolling into Beaver Stadium at 8-2 or 9-1.
I'm just saying, like,
look good on paper.
They have there is also the potential with. I mean, I guess you have this every year, but when you don't have this powerhouse non-conference schedule plus 3 cupcakes in the non-con, they could have a pretty weak 10-2 record.
Yes,
and at a minimum, it's going to hurt them seeding wise.
Yeah,
I tend to agree with you. 10-2 is going to get you in.
Yeah,
in this conference.
I know they're not on the level. I know Penn State fans don't want to hear this, and some Penn State fans will argue this tooth and nail. They're not on the level of a Georgia, a Bama, and Ohio State. They maybe were 25, 30 years ago. They're not now. But they're still big enough of a brand that if they're 10-2 and their 2 losses are to the 2 best teams on their schedule, they're not getting left out. The playoff is as much a business as it is anything else. I have a hard time seeing them left out at 10-2 under almost any scenario, unless you have a crazy year with teams reeling off 11 wins, 12 wins, something like that.
I think we could have a crazier conversation about what would happen if they lost to one of those first 3 teams, because all 3 of those, like none of those teams are good. Now, am I correct in saying
if they lose to one of those teams, James Franklin's gonna fighting for them.
Say they no, well, Mark, they have to play the games. They got to play the game. You play to win the game. All right.
Come on.
Let me ask you a question. Which of those teams has the greatest chance of giving Penn State problems? Didn't they struggle with like Kent State a year or 2 ago? Or was it who they? Yes, they struggled with somebody in
Bowling Green last year.
Well, excuse me. Sorry to give your alma mater. Sorry to give your alma mater credit when they didn't deserve it, Mark. Bowling Green. So Bowling Green, they struggle with Bowling Green. So it's not like it's impossible. When you play 3 gimmies at the start of the schedule, you could easily get complacent and start to look ahead to Oregon coming to town. And by the way, what you brought up is a great point, Marty. They crossed 3 time zones in that very next week for their first road game. So the schedule makeup is fascinating. I don't think it does them any favors not playing. I'd rather play somebody in the non-conference, even though 10-2 gets you in with 2 losses to those good teams. I still think 10-2 gets you in. I would at least would rather have a Virginia Tech or somebody to that nature, or at least be able to go on the road and say we played somebody on the road before we had to cross 3 time zones. And maybe as an Iowa guy, I'm a little gun shy after what happened to Iowa when they traveled out to play Foster's team last year, and that should be a better UCLA team this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree with all that, because I think last year, I'm sure anybody in that building will tell you, hey, that trip down to Morgantown to start the year did a lot of good for them in the long run. The way they need to go into a hostile environment like that, completely handle business, deal with the lightning delay. There are a lot of positives that came out of that outside of just winning the game. But I think too with Penn State now, again, this for every year is not the same. This is a team that coming into September, you're looking at a couple of key guys who had off-season surgery that you can really slowly ease them back into things. You've got a lot of young guys that you're going to rely on in depth roles this year. You can throw, you're going to be able to throw a lot of reps at them those first 3 games, barring absolute catastrophe. So that's where I think it's very beneficial this year, is it gives you a great runway to that Oregon game to be full bore ready to go when the Ducks come to town at the end of September.
I tell you what, and Marty, we love you, but I really want Penn State to lose one of those first 3 games. I see Matthew's comment in the chat. You got to stop with the dumb hypotheticals. My dead grandmother has a better chance. I mean, come on. Look, the more games you play against nobodies, the better chance you have of losing. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying they're going to lose. That's not what I'm saying. But we just admitted that it was last year that they really struggled against Bowling Green. I mean, I watched it. That was a very close game in the fourth quarter. And the whole reason why we're hyping up Penn State, why they're maybe a favorite to win the national championship this year, is because they return a lot of the same guys. So I'm not saying, I don't think any of those teams on the schedule in September, any of those teams have anything that I'm aware of that are even tricky. Like, it's not like they're playing I
don't think any of
Toledo.
those teams are even remotely as good as Bowling Green last year, because Bowling Green wasn't.
They're not only are they not Power 4 teams, they're crap FCS and FBS teams.
Yeah, you could argue FIU and Nevada are bottom 5 FBS teams this year.
Right.
So that's my thing too. It's because I get the Bowling Green argument. They were losing by 10 points in the second quarter in that game.
They were.
And, I mean, again, that was a good Bowling Green team. They had a tremendous coaching staff.
But in Happy Valley, that should never happen.
No, it shouldn't. It should not at all. I'm just saying I don't think comparing Bowling Green to Nevada, FIU, and Villanova is not completely apples to apples either.
No,
There's also a lot of issues in that game where, you can kind of look back on it now. That game, as wild as it sounds, may have already been kind of the beginning of the end for Tom Allen, because there was a lot of problems of him not relaying information to players properly, and it caused a lot of defensive confusion. And in the second half of that game, they completely overhauled at halftime how they called their defense, and Bowling Green had like 60 yards in the second half. So a lot of that stemmed from communication issues from the box as well. But hey, those things happen. Who's to say you don't have a game this year where your headsets aren't working and you got to figure out on the fly? So,
Mark,
those things do happen.
Did you think Michigan would lose to Appalachian back in the day? Did you think that would happen?
Yeah, I'm sure I predicted that. That was one of my.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So
we
can scoff all you want, but
Sure.
it is college football. Yes. The games have to be played, and when you play games back to back to back, there's a human tendency to overlook opponents, especially when everybody's talking about how we're looking for. I'm sure that everybody's going to be pinpointing that game against Oregon, and I would almost rather, Marty, them either play somebody in the Power 4 in September, other than Oregon, or not have to open with Oregon. Like, rather play somebody else, like a Maryland or even an Indiana. You just go from 0 to 60, and then the whole time. It's a tricky September stretch there. I mean, not because of the opponents are crap the first 3 weeks, but it's a tricky layout, I guess. So,
yeah, I would like to know. So we've seen Michigan App State. That Michigan team turned out to be a decent team. They were a 4-loss team, so they didn't complete a number 5 preseason ranking. But I can't recall a team that finished that strong, as is anticipated for Penn State, losing a game like that. There have been a lot of teams, not a lot, a few teams that have been preseason highly ranked, lost that kind of game, but they didn't turn out to be that good.
If there's one game on the schedule, and you named UCLA, Marty, this is my last question. If there's one game on the schedule other than Ohio State, Oregon, that scares you, is it UCLA, or is there you mentioned Nebraska? Is there another game?
It's Iowa. It is
Iowa. Okay. Yeah, it's going to Kinnick.
Kinnick is where top 5 teams go to die.
Okay.
It's just, in Penn State's had it happen to them there before more than once. I mean, we mentioned 3 games earlier where Penn State went into Kinnick Stadium ranked in the top 5. They lost 2 of them and needed a walk-off touchdown to win the 3rd. So it's definitely Iowa, just because, again, you know how Iowa's going to be coached. You know they're going to try and drag you down in the mud and make you play their game. Kinnick is not an easy place to play. And I do think, too, with Iowa, everybody will. So let's say going into that game, the season's gone as you would expect. Penn State goes in that game ranked first, second, third, whatever it may be. All week long, all you're going to hear is Kinnick Stadium and top 5 teams, and you're going to see highlights of that 2008 game and highlights of the 2016 game against Michigan and whatever year that was when they plastered Ohio State like 55-20 or whatever the score was. And it's human nature. If you hear nonstop for 3, 4, 5 days, hey, top 5 teams go here, bad things happen, things go wrong, you start to think that, you start to believe it, right? That's human nature. That's how it's going to work. So to me, outside of Oregon and Ohio State, it's definitely the trip to Iowa.
And unless I'm missing something, I was just going to say, unless I'm missing something, Iowa must be 3-0 against top 5 teams in the last 10 years at Kinnick, because they've won those 3 games. And I cannot recall them losing to that good of a team. I just don't think that they've played anybody else that's been that highly ranked at Kinnick. Michigan went there and won.
Yeah, I was gonna say they played Michigan 2 years ago there.
Yeah, they lost 2 or 3 years ago to Michigan at home.
Yeah,
that was a noon game.
Yeah, a lot of those thrashings that they've received have been on the road.
That's my hope, Mark. You mentioned it's a noon game. I know from some of the things I've heard, through the summer from people in the know within the program, the belief is Big Noon's going to want that game, which, yes, please, I would much rather play Iowa at noon than at night under any circumstance.
100%. And, I think the one thing you brought up earlier, too, is it's a great – the back half of the schedule is laid out nicely with the fact that you get Iowa and then a bye week.
Yes.
It's a perfect time for a bye, and then you got to play Ohio State.
Yes. I think if you get on the other side of that Ohio State game with 1 loss or no losses, you're going to feel really, really good at where you're at, because you shouldn't lose again. Like Indiana and Nebraska may not be cakewalks, but those are games that you should probably comfortably win. Michigan State, I don't think they're going to be much better this year, especially if Aiden Childs doesn't learn to hold on to the football, and then you got Rutgers in there. So I do think if you can get the other side of that Ohio State game and you're setting there 7-1, 8-0, you're going to feel great about where you're at in terms of reaching the Big Ten championship game again, in terms of playoff seeding.
Even if
you got to get there first.
If you have 2 losses after the Ohio State game, you're like, all right, we just take care of business and we're going to get.
You still feel good. You may not feel great because you're probably not getting back to Indy, right. And you may not get a home playoff game in the first round, but you still feel like, hey, as long as you take care of business, we'll be there. Yeah, exactly. Be a much harder road, but you'd much rather have a harder road and have a chance than not be there at all.
Yes, functionally, operationally, they'll be fine. But in terms of the psyche and the fan psyche, if it's like, well, we played Oregon and Ohio State, we lost those 2 games, and then, we beat all these other teams we're supposed to be, we're pretty much in that same, we still need to prove ourselves.
And I want to make it very clear, I'm not predicting they're going to lose to any of those first 3 teams. I think they're going to beat Oregon. I think with all that being, I think they'll beat Oregon, and I think they'll go 11. My guess is they'll go 11. I haven't broken down the schedule like Mark has, but I think they'll go 11. I think it's, in general, probably a little bit below average as far as strength of schedule. Again, it's plenty strong to have a viable resume at 10-2, but I do think Oregon will be down with the quarterback transition. Maybe that's overhyped a bit. I think it'll be a challenge. Obviously, again, just everything about the timing of all that is intriguing to me. But I think they'll go 11-1, and I could see them beating Ohio State. I mean, we were just talking earlier on the Iowa show about we don't really know who the quarterback at Ohio State is, right, Mark? Is it Lincoln Kienholz, or is it what's his face?
We thought it was going to be Julian Sayans the entire off season, but now Kienholz is getting a lot of pub.
I mean, whoever the quarterback is with the receivers, I'd like to think that they would manage not to screw that up, but who knows? But one more thing with the schedule, too, that I keep thinking here, Corey, like you're saying, hey, it's not a terrible schedule, but it's not overly – I think this is a schedule. If you are a team the caliber Penn State expects to be this year, you look at that schedule and you say, hey, we should be able to put 10 wins pretty close to Sharpie going in with our 2 toss-up games. But if you are – a team that's in the kind of a boat of like an Iowa, in Illinois, like, hey, we expect to be in that 8 to 10 win range. You look at the schedule and I think it's a little more challenging. I think it's one of those where if you are that top tier team, you are what you expect to be this year's Penn State. You don't worry too much about it. But I do think, you take a step or 2 down the rung, it could be more of a challenging schedule just based off of, Iowa. Like you said, UCLA should be better. I don't expect Indiana to win 11 games again, but I don't think they're going to go off a cliff either. Nebraska, as I said, I don't know if Nebraska is going to be a great team, but if you look at their schedule, they might come into Happy Valley at 9-1, and it looked like a really good win on paper. So, yeah, I think that's the biggest thing with me. The schedule is just if you are this national championship caliber team that Penn State feels they are and have every right to feel that way, it's a schedule where you should feel confident putting 10 wins, in my opinion, in Sharpie going into the season with those two toss-ups.
Marty, we appreciate you being here. Now, Corey's got to take off. So, Corey, again, this is our first edition.
Yeah, and let me just say, Christopher Foote in the chat said he could do a better job than a committee. So if the Big Ten or if the playoff committee is listening, if the powers that be here, Christopher Foote is putting his foot in the zone on the mat. He's ready to go. So anyways, same time next week, Mark.
Yes.
And good to see you, and good to see you as well, Marty. And we'll chomp it up before Iowa Penn State.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Corey. See ya. And before Marty, you take off here, I got one more question for you.
Absolutely.
So if you could talk to James Franklin this week, so in the spirit of Big Ten Media Days, get to ask him anything. But no, he takes a truth serum, and so he's got to answer you bluntly and correctly and in complete truth. What would you ask if you could have just sit down with James Franklin? What would be one question that you would ask him, knowing that he had to spill his guts?
I think I would ask him. Man, it's tough because I can think of a couple. But I would
Well, you can draw out a couple.
I think I go twofold. I'll go one kind of like recap last season and look ahead to this year. I'd ask him after that Notre Dame game, because I'm sure it had to be the feeling of, oh my God, here we go again. Big time stage, had the game in hand and let it go. What did you change, if anything, entering the offseason in terms of just your entire offseason approach to try and flush that game? Because I mean, I know how it was as a spectator, as a fan, trying to come out of that game. I can't imagine what it had to be like in that locker room to lose that game the way they did. And then I would ask, going into this season, what are you going to do differently for preparing for that caliber of a game for the Oregon, especially that trip to Ohio State, right? What are you going to do differently? Because you've been so close so many times the last however many years, and it's been one seemingly gut punch after another. I think that's part of what's made it so bad for Penn State, right? It's not just that you've lost these games. So many of them have been in utter heartbreaking fashion, or where you're leading late into the fourth quarter, or, you control the line of scrimmage almost the entire game and things go sideways. So that's what I'd ask him, hey, when the offseason started, what did you look to change in terms of your offseason approach, maybe program wide, to improving these games and avoid those letdowns, those big moments? And now as we transition into the season, hey, in season, especially that week leading up to the game, what are we going to do differently? Especially a year like this year where before your two biggest games, as we mentioned, you've got a bye week. So you've essentially got two. I mean, Oregon, you've got like a month to prep for. But with Ohio State, you essentially have 2 weeks to prep for them. So what would you change on that front as well?
Cool. Marty, appreciate you being here. And we'll talk some Penn State football here soon.
Absolutely, Mark. Talk to you soon.
All right. The real MVP has been waiting patiently, so we'll bring him on in. DeReal, what's going on?
Well, nothing much. How about you, Mark?
Doing well, doing well.
Well, it seems like media cycle when these media days, some coach puts his foot in his mouth. Eli Drinkwitz and the SEC media days. And Mark, day one, we've already got a clear front runner, and it's Kirk Cignetti. He was asked about why he's, basically ducking teams like Virginia, and he said he's adopting a, quote, SEC scheduling model. I mean, the argument he's making is the SEC only plays 8 conference games, so why should we in Indiana play someone else? And I understand the philosophical argument he's making, but it makes no logical sense. But Mark, I want you to attack it first, please.
Yeah, so we have Minnie Hunt out at Big Ten Media Days, representing the Voice for College Football, and she stopped by our earlier show. And so she started in on that. And I think I responded by using the terms asinine and moronic. And those two come to mind in regards to Kurt Cignetti's comments. This is the last guy in the conference that should be commenting on this in a confrontational sort of way, because his teams play high school teams in non-conference play. And then Mike Loxley was asked the same question, and he responded in a similar manner, basically kind of shielded himself with Kurt Signetti by saying, you know, what Kurt said, I agree with all that. Well, your team's not playing anyone either. So, yes, functionally, I understand the argument that going with the premise, all conferences are created equal, or at least the Big Ten and the SEC are. Therefore, we play 9 games. They should play 9 games because we are automatically, with this philosophy, with this approach, this mindset, if you believe in this, we are automatically playing a tougher schedule because we are playing 9 conference games and they are only playing 8 conference games. However, let's be more nuanced than that. So if we're not going to consider all the conferences to be equal, since they're all Power 4 conferences, then we can have a objective but also reasonable look at all these conferences, and also recognize that despite what the Big Ten has been able to accomplish the last 2 years, that the Big Ten from top to bottom is not as good as the SEC. So most likely that 8-game schedule in the SEC is probably the tougher Big Ten conference schedules are tougher than the worst SEC schedules. I assume, or could probably analyze there to be some overlap between the two, but by and large, the 8 games that the SEC teams play are more difficult than take 8 teams or the 8 most difficult games in any Big Ten schedule. On average, the SEC games are tougher and the SEC schedule is tougher. Then on top of that, there are no teams in the SEC that go out and schedule no Power 4 conference teams. There is no one who fits that bill. And then we also have teams in the SEC who go out and play 2 Power Conference opponents. So, and then to complete my take on this, is that why is the SEC in a position to increase to 9 conference games? Why wouldn't the SEC look at the Big Ten and say, why don't you drop back to 8 conference games? Like, I believe that these conference schedules are more legitimate the more games you play, because of the massive size of these conferences. And obviously, the less games you play within the conference, that illegitimizes the schedule for every less game that you play, for obvious reasons, if everybody understands my reasoning there. However, there is no governing body, there is no commissioner to mandate how many conference games you play. So the Big Ten can beg and plead or stomp their feet all they want about how many conference games you should play. But why is 9 the magic number and not 8? Why don't we play 10 conference games? Why doesn't the Big Ten say, if the Big Ten is clinging to being such the superior conference and that we should play more conference games, play 10?
I think that's really well spoken, and I would just like to add a few more points to your excellent soliloquy there, Mark. I've looked at the top 25 rankings, and I have yet to see a team called SEC. You can't compare a conference to an individual team. You got to compare individual teams to individual teams. Alabama, Ole Miss, and South Carolina were the teams Indiana was competing for generally with the playoff spot last year.
Yeah.
You know what they all have in common, Mark, with their non-conference?
They all played legitimate teams.
Right, and they all played a Power 4 opponent last year. Wouldn't that just count that as the 9th game? And compare that to Indiana's 9 games. I'm sorry. This idea that even all Power Conference teams are created equal is garbage. Indiana played Purdue last year. Why does Purdue count as much as Wisconsin and Clemson? You're telling me Clemson counts as much as Purdue, Kirk Signetti? This is moronic. This is idiotic. Okay? And this is why we need a strength of scheduling component. Because you just can't say, well, we played one more team that has this designation, therefore they're better than all teams in the group of 5.
Yeah, it's an indication. It's not the end all be all. Yeah, if you said to me, Team A played 10 power conference teams and Team B played 6, well, I could probably come to a reasonable conclusion that the first team played a tougher schedule. But when you're talking about 9 versus 8, like you said, the best team in the country we know is a power conference team, and about the 40th or 50th best team. But once we start to hit in that range somewhere, we got the Boise States of the world and the Memphises of the world and the Tulanes that are better than a decent amount of power conference teams.
Right. And look this year. Look at the top of the SEC, because the middle and bottom don't count. It doesn't matter who Kentucky, Mississippi State's playing, because they're not in the playoffs. They're not going to the playoffs.
Sure.
Texas, they're playing Ohio State. Does that matter for something? Alabama, they're going to play Wisconsin. LSU's playing Clemson. Georgia's they play Georgia Tech. All these top teams that are going to be in the playoff consideration are playing at least one Power 4 team that is really good.
Yes.
Compare that to what Indiana's doing. The SEC schedule compared to the best SEC teams versus Indiana, the SEC should always win the argument. Because Indiana is choosing to play nobody. And their conference schedule isn't deep enough to justify them playing nobody.
Texas A&M is playing Notre Dame on the road. So is Arkansas playing Notre Dame.
Even last year, when people were making fun of Ole Miss for their garbage conference schedule, they at least went on the road and played somebody. I mean, Wake Forest is better than, they're not great, but they're around the 40th best team in the country. They were a capable, decent team last year. Put them in Indiana's schedule, for goodness sake. I mean, they probably would win 6, 7, 8 games last year with how garbage their schedule was. And I know that's an admiration and a blip. But the problem with these large conferences is you're going to have one of these random teams that play nobody, and if you tell them you can't play anybody outside, we're going to have no realistic data points to go off of. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, and I would want these teams to play the same number of conference games. I want these teams to play the same number of conference games. Now, that's not going to solve our problem. Our problem is not going to be solved because these conferences are never going to be equal. Even the Big Ten and the SEC, there's going to be some imbalance there, which I'm okay with as long as they're comparable. And I think that they're comparable now. I think that anybody who really understands the quality of these teams top to bottom and conference top to bottom know that the SEC is a better conference top to bottom than the Big Ten, but they're comparable. It's not a joke. It's not a wide gap. Now, when you bring in the other two, there's a wide gap. So just by playing 9 conference games, that's not solving much,
right?
If anything. And then we get into the whole issue with non-conference games and what they really count for going forward.
Correct.
And then teams are going to run away from playing those games and already are.
Right. It's because Indiana got into the playoffs last year, because SMU no doubtably got into the playoffs last year. This is the consequences of those choices being made. This is what's happening. I know people don't want to hear it because Alabama's Alabama. They always win, and there's always some conspiracy theory. This would not be happening if Alabama made the playoffs last year. And by the way, the record that Alabama didn't deserve the playoffs, Mark, this is a 12-team playoff field last year, and then Alabama was ranked the 11th best team in the country. In my opinion, if you're a top 12 team, you probably should belong in a 12-team playoff field. That's just my opinion, though. I know we like to do things that outsmart ourselves, so the Alabama didn't get in. But something else I wanted to ask you about is, did you see Tony Petitti's comments during the Big Ten Media Day?
I think I heard them secondhand.
Yeah. He was basically saying if you go 6-3 and you have a blimp out of conference game result, then you still should be in the playoffs. That's basically the gist he was saying. So he's literally arguing for 8-4 teams to automatically be in the playoffs. Like Iowa, for example. Like, what are we doing here, Mark? 8-4 teams that lose their big out of conference games being in the playoffs is crazy. I've argued for 8-4 teams to be in the playoffs if they play a ridiculously tough schedule, but that should be the main parameters. They play a ridiculously tough schedule. Iowa does not play a good enough schedule to belong in the playoffs. And they don't have that major out-of-conference win last year to justify them being one of the 16 or 12 best teams. They just don't.
Yeah, so what you're pointing to is, of course, Tony Petitti. If he gets his way, then there are going to be 4 automatic berths in the Big Ten. And if we go through the last 10 or 15 years in the Big Ten, especially since they've been playing 9 conference games since 2017, I believe was the year, then we're going to find 6 and 3 teams that finished in 4th place in the Big Ten. And there is a possibility, I don't know if any of these past teams have done it, but solid possibility that one of these 8 and 4 teams, or I'm sorry, 6 and 3 teams in the conference would have dropped their non-conference games, and they will receive one of these 4 spots. That's what he wants.
Yeah, and the reason he wants it that way is because they can't win it on the football field against the other conferences. And they've proven that by losing the out-of-conference game, by the way.
Well, he just wants to make sure that he gets 4 teams in. And so the Big Ten will always get 4 teams in, and he knows that there is great opportunity to get 5 or 6 in a good year. And if some of those mid-level teams that we're talking about are high to mid-level teams in the Big Ten can win a big non-conference game, or at least hold serve and beat 3 bad teams out of conference to puff up their record to 9 and 3, that they'll get a playoff spot.
Right, which I understand why he's doing it, but it's just a horrible look, in my opinion, for the health of the sport overall, to have cream puff schedules and then try to artificially inflate your record and then give the automatic burst to incentivize them in. He's also, like, for playing games, we're getting to the point in college football where it's almost going to be impossible to keep track of, because you're going to have these ridiculous tiebreakers because of how large the conference is. You don't have anybody play anybody that matches up, so you got to go to some weird, like, points margin differential. It's becoming nonsense, unfortunately, because we're expanding it so much. Why? We all know the reason, but do you think the reason Tony Petitti, because he came out again for the 5+11 model, is just because he understands that they don't have the depth to compete?
Yeah. The 4, again, is a guarantee of 4. And so in a bad season, if you go through the Big Ten's recent history, it's been a very top-heavy conference. And once you get past number 3, now I know they've added Oregon and USC, and maybe Washington can do something. So they've added depth. There's no doubt that it's a much deeper conference than it's been. But if those 3 schools don't step in, then yeah, there's a history of the Big Ten having like one great team and then one good team in the Penn State range and then a bunch of Iowas, or having 2 great teams and then so forth and so on. So once you reach that 4 or 5 spot, that it is rather, mediocre to decent.
Correct. Absolutely correct.
But to the Big Ten's defense and Tony Petitti, that should be mitigated, with USC, Washington, and Oregon.
Yeah. I mean, Oregon did mitigate it a lot last year, but the other 2 teams haven't stepped up. USC seems to have another down year coming this year. And UCLA, by the way, is such a non-factor, you don't even mention them when talking about this conversation.
Yeah.
What do you think you're going to hear tomorrow? Just a little what do you think you're going to hear the next 2 days?
Well, I'm trying to figure out who we're going to see tomorrow. I haven't looked at the schedule, but anyway, I think what is going to be taking hold here is that once James Franklin hits town, then he's going to be inundated with questions about what's it going to take this year? Do you have what it takes? What happened at the end of last year? What happened in the Notre Dame game? What if Drew Aller gets in another situation like he got into last year where he's going to lead the team down the field? What is he doing to become a better leader, to become a better clutch player, not make those mistakes in key situations? Do you really consider 2025 as a breakthrough, or 2024 as a breakthrough, or that you really proved anything considering X, Y, and Z? You made it into the playoff because of the expanded field. You defeated a couple teams in the playoffs, but were they really playoff caliber teams that you wouldn't have beaten all these other years anyway? There's just going to be all those pressure questions directed toward Drew Aller and James Franklin. And Drew Aller directly is going to be asked about the last throw against Notre Dame and what he needs to do to correct those kind of mistakes in key situations. And I'm sure at some point somebody's going to have the bravery to throw James Franklin's top 5 record against those opponents in his face. That's something like 1-14 and so forth and so on. So that's going to be a big key or a big talking point. And then, of course, Michigan comes to town amidst I guess this is the football program that's constantly under NCAA investigation. So here they are in a second consecutive, I guess it's only 2 consecutive Big Ten media days under NCAA investigation. So all those questions are going to be answered about distractions. And then I think it's going to be more talk, especially since Kurt Signetti gave it a little bit of a boost today about the playoff and about the SEC. These writers want to earn their money and want to get clicks. So they're going to go back to the well of what gets the most traction, and that's playoff talk.
I got you, Mark. I guess the final thing I'll say is Greg Sankey needs to add Alabama, Kentucky, Georgia, Mississippi State, Texas, Arkansas in order, to really ramp up the non-conference games. Those games are going to make the difference in everyone's mind, Mark, of whether these teams belong in the playoffs or not. So just add those in, let them get beat every year, and nothing will change, Mark. People will find still a way to complain.
Thanks for being here, Darrell.
No problem.
All right, folks. This is our newly launched or relaunched Big Ten Live Show. Corey Brada on with me earlier to start this thing off. So Corey and I will get together every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern time to talk Big Ten football with you. Of course, we got media days. Hopefully, Minnie Hunt will be back with us here shortly as she is wrapping up. Let's see, it's about 4 p.m. Eastern time or Western Pacific time there in Vegas. So Minnie should be concluding those interviews. Tim, you can always jump on and give us the straight deal on USC. I believe the Trojans hit the podium the final day. Lincoln Riley and players, and also Bradley Loomis, who co-hosts our Indiana show on the Hoosiers channel, is ready to join us here at some point in the next half hour. And we also hopefully will hear from Sonny Verma, Locked On Illinois. I tried to grab everybody that I could that is covering media days for the teams that hit the podium today, which would be Ohio State, Nebraska, Indiana, Rutgers, Illinois. I think those were the teams. Again, I will leave the link in the chat. And as we await our media guests, give me a call to discuss the Big Ten. And I know this is the Big Ten Live Show, but hey, if you want to talk about anything in college football, including, of course, it is, I know to many of you, this is talking about the minor leagues, but it's the ACC media days this week as well. Stanford, SMU, Miami, Virginia, I believe, hit the podium today in Charlotte. The Amazon links in the description section of all the videos. When you shop on Amazon, please use the link that we provide. And it's the one way you can help us build the voice of college football from a financial standpoint without spending a penny. And also the audio from all of these shows on the main channel you can find on your favorite audio platform. You know what? You can find all of them on your favorite audio platform from all the channels here at the Voice of College Football. So all the live streams are downloaded to audio. So that goes for all the team channels as well. We've got watch parties this summer. We took on Ohio State and Michigan from 2021. We took on the Rose Bowl win of Michigan over Bama, and we still have to do our vote. And so you will be seeing a poll here in the next several days to determine who we're going to watch in August. Good point. As I shunned the ACC, calling them the minor leagues, Indiana reminded us this week that Virginia may be too daunting of a task to take on during the non-conference season, as there was a home-and-home series between Virginia and Indiana scheduled for later this decade, and Indiana has put the kibosh on that one and gave up $500,000 to do it. Now, I understand some people have told me, well, by doing so, Indiana picks up a home game for one of those seasons. They can make more money playing at home than they do on the road. Therefore, they can pick up the ticket sales, which are massive, I'm sure, for the Kennesaw State game, the massive ticket sales at home, and then also everything else that goes along with home games for the local economy. And that is greater than $500,000 that they paid off to Virginia. However, if Indiana ever had a decent non-conference team ever travel to Bloomington to play, they may actually find out firsthand what their stadium could look like and what the local traffic and the economy boost to the area could look like if they actually had somebody show up that, you know, maybe wore the same colors, like Oklahoma or Alabama or somebody like that. But I don't think we will see that anytime soon out of Indiana football. Yeah, John's reminding us that we get the Michigan. I got Big Ten on the brain. I've spit out the name Big Ten so many times today. We've got the Michigan show. That's at 8 p.m. Eastern time with John, with TJ on the Michigan channel. That's every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern time. And if you lose track, as I do, of all the shows here at the Voice of College Football, I've got a number of Google Docs, but I do not expect you to keep a Google Doc like I do. What you need to do is just check out the community page on the main channel, and I post the daily schedule, the live stream schedule on the main channel each and every day. Good call, Gregory. If you want to check out the Nebraska content that's going on right now, and I'm sure they're reacting to Matt Rule and Nebraska players at Big Ten Media Days. Thank you for that, Gregory. That we've got the Nebraska Huskers live show, GBR, over on the Nebraska channel with Justin and Brian doing such a magnificent job every Tuesday at 7 Eastern time. Got Christopher, wasn't Virginia in the AFC Championship game? Now, would that not have been something in the AFC Championship game? Obviously, Christopher means the ACC Championship game. Yes, in 2019 against Clemson. 2019 against Clemson. I believe the final score of that game was something like 63-21 or something. Yes, Virginia was in an ACC championship game. Unless their program drastically changes, they will not be seeing any more ACC championship games. Alec, of course, appreciates everything I have to say about Indiana football, which, to Alex's point, Earlier on the first show, when we were on at 4 Eastern, all this is good for Indiana football, because the only time I talked about Indiana football prior to last season was during the preseason, just because I had to do a prediction video, or so I thought. And other than that, the only Indiana football I would talk about is if they were playing Ohio State or Michigan or Penn State that week, or because Tom Allen got hired, or because he got fired, or because I felt bad for them and wanted to talk some Indiana football once every 6 months or so. So much more talk about Indiana football these days. Yes, Whoa Nelly, we recall that Virginia football team was 9-3, lost to Clemson in the ACC championship game, and lost to Florida in a competitive, for a while, Orange Bowl. It was a decent game. It was an okay game, but nothing too spectacular. And yes, Florida took care of them in that game. Trying to remember the final score. I usually can remember final scores. 43-24. Look that one up. The Orange Bowl between Virginia and Florida. 43-24 is what I'm coming up with. All right, that's enough of that. Let's keep it rolling here at the Voice of College Football as we continue to break down Big Ten Media Days. And I was just making the comment that we used to never talk Indiana football. Now it seems like that's all we talk about, and we'll do some more.
Here we are, more
Got
Indiana
Bradley
football.
Loomis here with us. Bradley, how you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, Mark. How are you?
Doing well, Brad. So Kurt Signetti, we already went through him going off on the scheduling situation and the SEC. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about that, because even though we've kind of beaten it to death, I didn't know if you had anything in particular there that you wanted to hit on.
Yeah, I think I didn't really know what was going to happen when I hopped on here, post gym, and but I did figure that the scheduling thing regarding the SEC would definitely be a topic of conversation. So I kind of prepared some stats here. I'm just trying to compare, so the SEC, they play eight conference games, right? And then they play an additional probably Power 4 team, right? Typically, and that would equate to like a typical Big Ten schedule, right?
Sure.
Something like that, right? So I was looking at the past 2 years, which SEC teams are actually have a right to actually gripe with Indiana scheduling. That is, and and I qualify that as teams that probably play 2+ Power 4 games in addition to their SEC schedule, because that's better than what Indiana's doing, right? And then also no FCS would also qualify. So the past 2 seasons, the only school in the SEC to not play an FCS school is Texas. They're the only ones. Everyone else plays at least one FCS school the past 2 years. Last year, it was 3 different schools, Georgia, LSU, and Florida, that played at least 2 Power 4 schools. And then this year, it's only Bama, Florida, and South Carolina that are playing. So in reality, the majority of the SEC is playing a very similar schedule to what Indiana does by what they're doing in terms of playing, two Group of 5 schools and an FCS school to set themselves up for a grueling 9-game conference schedule in the Big Ten.
Yes. So if we were just adding up Power 5 schedules and opponents, and then the G5, and then the FCS, yes, Indiana has a similar schedule to most of the SEC, because they only play one power conference team out of conference. So that's your breakdown, which I totally get from that perspective. If every power conference team in the nation is comparable, then the Big 12 plays as good a schedule than the...
That's assuming the Big 12 is as good as the Big 10, but then that's when we get in all these hypotheticals again,
Yeah. We know that the Big 12 is not as good as the Big 10. If we're going to talk about the Big Ten and the SEC, then we could argue all night over who is the better conference there. I still believe it to be the SEC. If we're talking about the top all the way to the bottom, if we're talking about who can compete for a national championship, then obviously the Big Ten has proven the last 2 years that they had the team that could do it. So you can take on that argument from both standpoints.
Do I agree with what Indiana is necessarily doing? You know, I would rather play Virginia. I'd rather wake up on a Saturday and watch Indiana play Virginia than I'd rather wake up and watch them play Indiana State or Kennesaw State or whoever they got lined up on that schedule. The reality is that I think the gripes are just a little out of hand, and I think they're just unjustified. The only real schools that have a real qualm to me is Bama, Florida, and South Carolina, at least when it comes from SEC fan bases and things like that. I do respect Texas not following suit in the SEC, not playing an FCS school, because for the longest time, I grew up a UCLA fan, and they're one of 3 schools to not play an FCS school up until around like 2022 when they scheduled an HBCU program for like the first time. But Notre Dame, USC, and UCLA were the only 3 schools to never play an FCS school year in and year out. Love seeing Texas doing that. I think, you know, we have 136 now teams in the FBS. It makes no sense to not be able to fill a 12-game schedule with, you know, all FBS schools. It's how I think it should be. Whether or not you want to schedule more group of 5 or Power 4 schools, that honestly you can kind of do whatever you want there, because as long as as long as you think there's enough competition, I could see where, you know, I think the Big Ten does have a qualm playing that 9-game versus an 8-game conference schedule, because year in and year out, you know that it's going to be tough, regardless of who's good and who's bad on a given year. The slate as a whole, it's going to be pretty equal in the long term. If you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Why is the SEC schedules? Why would that not be a tough schedule?
I never said it wasn't. I'm just
Okay.
saying maybe they should have it at 9. I think they should standardize the scheduling, which is, I think, a big point of what Signetti was kind of saying, you know, at the press conference, that they should be standardized. There should be a qualification in terms of what you need to meet as an SEC school, as a Big Ten school, if you're going to be a part of an auto bid for the college football playoff.
What's funny about all this, and I this time of year with media days, I love the hypocrisy. Like today, I didn't see anything out of ACC media days except for Rhett Lashley was cutting on SEC schools, basically saying there's only a handful of them that have won national championships, and then somebody tallied it, and obviously that's a ridiculous attack on his part, because the difference between the SEC and the ACC is light years, and I could go through a dissertation defending the SEC and how competitive it's been. It's not just 2 teams winning national championships. They've had 8 teams win national championships in like 25 or 30 years. But back to my original point was going to be, why is it the SEC's responsibility to play 9 games? Everyone else was playing 8 conference games. The Pac-12 was actually playing 9 conference games before anyone. And the Big Ten decided it's only been since 2017 that the Big Ten decided to add a 9th conference game. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And why, I don't know why the Big Ten is taking it upon itself to like push the SEC to play a 9th conference game.
As opposed to maybe the Big Ten moves back to 8 like they used to be. I mean, either way, I just think it should be equal. It's not really about.
I agree, it should be equal
on
as well.
Someone to do something, you know.
I totally agree, Brad. It should be equal, and actually, more conference games mean or make the conference championship, in my opinion, and this is just sheer math, makes the conference championship more legitimate, because the larger these conferences get. So if you're in the Big Ten and you're playing 9 conference games and there's 18 teams in the conference, so there's 17 other teams, that means you miss 8 teams in the conference. So these conferences are getting too large that you're missing too many teams in the conference. The reason you play in a conference is you play everyone. That's the way it used to be. You play everybody basically in the conference. Well, now you play half the teams. But the point I'm making is I don't think the Big Ten or any conference is in any position to point at the SEC and say, you need to play 9 conference games. Why?
I think it inflates their records over a long period of time. You know, you mentioned the SEC
it
being
does.
really good top. Not saying the SEC wasn't the best conference over the past 20 years. I'm saying that their records, top to bottom, are very much inflated just due to the fact that they do get that.
Well,
you know,
well, they're not very much inflated. Here's how they're
inflated
inflated,
enough.
Brad. They're inflated this way:
Yeah.
that instead of playing an extra conference game, they're playing the Citadel and they're playing East Tennessee State and et cetera, Sun Belt conference teams. And so, again, it's the simple math that the week that the Big Ten teams are playing conference games, who's winning the games? Well, the easiest prediction to make is that half the teams are winning the games because they're all playing each other. So half of them have to win, half of them have to lose. So the Big Ten teams are going 9-9 in those 18 games because they're all playing each other, where the SEC, their 16 teams are going out and playing nobody. So what are they doing? They're going 16-0. And if they happen to lose a game, like Vandy lost to Georgia State last year, they at worst go 15-1. And that loss doesn't even matter because that team's not making the playoffs anyway. So you're right. So that artificially inflates it a game for half those teams.
Yeah, about a half game conference average per year.
Yeah.
Half game up if you were to,
but that's not taking into account. So that's the point I'm making that supports your argument.
Yeah.
But that doesn't take into account how good the conference is.
I agree. Because, I grew up watching SEC on CBS, watching those Florida Tennessee games. And I mean, it was very clear that was the cream of the crop in the country. The reality is that I don't think that's necessarily fact. And I think, a lot of these slights come from an idea where people don't think the Big Ten week in and week out is just as grueling as an SEC slate, which I think it is, especially considering that all these conferences got bigger and you do dodge about 8 or 9 teams in each conference, and regardless of the year. So, I miss the days of the Pac-10. I think they had it perfect where, the 9-game conference slate, you play everyone every year. And, like you said, I think conferences just got way too big. And and the Pac-10 didn't catch up fast enough and, had those deflated conference records by having to play each other year in and year out with a 9-game slate, and eventually found their way to be pretty not, relevant at all.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it kind of did them in by trying to keep the sport pure, which is kind of like ironic that they're trying to like keep it traditional, whereas other schools were going into conference championship game modes. And like the Big Ten, they transitioned to the Big Ten championship game like around 2010, right? Or
yeah. If we go to circa early 90s, then everybody played everyone in conference. The SEC was only 10 teams until 1992. The Big Ten had 10 teams. Penn State became 11 in 1993. But before that, 10 teams in the Big Ten. As you mentioned, 10 in the Pac-10, 10 in the SEC. The ACC had like 7 teams. 8, I think they had 18. They at one point had 17. They had 8 teams at the point that I'm talking about. So they played 7 conference games because they played everyone. When the Big East came around and became the 5th BCS conference, which I thought was a joke because it wasn't good enough. But anyway, the Big East became a thing. And I'm talking more so after like Miami left and I'm Florida's during the 2000s when it was Rutgers, West Virginia, et cetera, et cetera. They played.
The Big East always did disappoint those BCS bowl games for sure.
Yeah. And really, the Big East only has as good a record in those BCS bowl games is because sometimes they get a light touch and play like the worst, of the other conference champions, like a Wake Forest out of the ACC one year, for example. But anyway, my point being, everyone would play everyone. And I remember in the Big Ten one year, and even when they played 8 conference games and there were 10 teams in the Big Ten, so you'd miss one team. And even some people threw a fit about that and said, you got to play everybody in your conference. You're in a conference. And obviously the math would weigh out that would rarely matter. But I do remember a couple times it did matter. Like, oh, these 2 teams didn't play each other. They tied for the conference championship.
Yeah. It's funny how it works out, because in the long term, you know, dodging one team every year, like mathematically, like it would work out, but like that's over several recruiting cycles, you know, so things can totally change in that time. Like you dodge Ohio State, you know, year 1 per se, and then and then you get to dodge them again in year 9, and that doesn't really bode in your favor between years 2 and 7. So
actually, since we've got a large Big Ten contingent here, 1981, 82, 95 come to mind. So in 81, Ohio State and Iowa tied for the Big Ten championship. And they didn't play each other. So I don't know if you remember this or you're too young to remember this. I don't know if you've read this.
Alive. This is going down, Mark.
But the Big Ten used to have this inane rule that the first version of this rule was really ridiculous, that regardless of whether you won outright the conference championship, if you won the year before, you could not go to the Rose Bowl 2 years in a row.
Yeah. We've talked about that rule on the show before.
Unbelievable.
It's a pretty funny rule. And as a Pasadena native, I stand by the Rose Bowl committee and whatever decision they make. I'm glad they changed it eventually, but as a Pasadena native, I stand by the Rose committee.
Did the Pac-10 do that? I don't know that the Pac-8.
It was, they did.
They did the same thing.
Got screwed a couple times with that rule.
So you're sending your second best team out to, okay, whatever. And so then then the next rule that was put into play was that if the 2 teams didn't play, so 81, Ohio State and Iowa didn't play, but they tied for the Big Ten championship, the team that went to the Rose Bowl the furthest back, so the most recent team couldn't go, the other team got to go. That's how they decided.
That is some Florida State level screw over the kids, you know, just ridiculous.
Yeah. And that really screwed over Ohio State and Michigan because they were always going to Rose Bowl. So they'd run into some team that hadn't gone for 25 years and they always got to go.
Yeah. That checks out.
Then here's really screwed up, Brad. The next year in 1982, Ohio State beat Michigan, but Michigan finished 8-1. Ohio State finished 7-1. They didn't play the same number of conference games. So Michigan got to go to the Rose Bowl. That's stupid.
How does that happen?
Like half the teams in the conference played 9 games and half the teams played 8 games.
I mean, that's one of the biggest oversights in the sport.
Yeah.
As a sporting fan, you know, in terms of like how to, like, if you were like run a rec league, like they wouldn't even make that mistake, which is so funny.
We got a league. Everybody plays the same number of games, right? Yeah.
It's pretty straightforward stuff.
Well, Brad, we appreciate you being here, but we can't let you go without talking some Indiana football since we've been talking all this big picture stuff. So leave everyone with the pitch on why Indiana is going to be just as good this coming season as they were in 2024, if not better.
If on paper, they're definitely better. They had a top 10 defense last year, bring back 3 All-Americans from that defense, in addition to some really interesting transfers that they're bringing in, as well as returning safety Amari Farrell, who's a true junior this year, has a ton of NFL buzz on his end. And then we go to offense, where they're bringing back 3 starters from a Joe Moore Award-nominated offensive line, returning all-conference receivers Elijah Surratt, bringing in Roman Hemby from Maryland, and then, of course, Fernando Mendoza, the crown jewel of the transfer portal class, beat Georgia out for him to bring him home to Bloomington. And the offense is just going to be clicking just as good as it was last year. Top 10 on both sides of the ball. They improve in special teams, bringing back kicker Radicic and bringing in a transfer punter that will add 4 yards on average to the punt game. They're locked and loaded. They're just as good. They're better on paper than they were last year. It really just comes down to getting the dubs, and that's something just Sig has been proven to do over and over again. Obviously, the looming question, crazy to say in year 2, but can he win the big one? We'll see this year. He's got a couple opportunities at Iowa, Illinois at home, and at Oregon and at Penn State. Going into last year, I picked out 4 key games. Sig won 3 out of 4 of those. I think he does the same thing this upcoming year. My pick prediction's 11-1 for the Hoosiers, and they go back to the playoff and become a new blood in college football.
Oh, I like that. New blood.
Yeah.
Did you come up with that, or is that
I
out
think
there?
it's been used before. I don't think I can invent that, but that
Okay.
is what I'm going to start calling Indiana for sure.
I haven't heard that one. New blood. Did you hear that, folks? 11-1. You know that most people, when they went into this offseason, they just, like, Indiana was the first team they thought of when they thought, okay, who's going to take a step back?
Yeah.
Without even looking at it. And I admitted to these guys, meaning Brad and Alec, and they do a remarkable job on our Indiana channel. So check them out tonight at 8 Eastern. That I just kind of did a default schedule look, 8-4, 5-4 in the Big Ten, 8-4. Then I did my deep dive and started to dive into the offensive line and all the layers on defense, and I notched them up a game to 9-3.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that because it really does come down to how actually good Fernando Mendoza is going to be in that offense. It's very quarterback friendly. He was sacked a lot at Cal, so there's a lot of pluses in his game that we're going to see. He's a lot more mobile than Rourke, but is he the same passer as Rourke? I think that's hard to tell until you put him on the field and put him in the same offense. I think he brings a lot of different things to the room. He's a really great leader, but it's really just going to come down to his play at the field because let's be honest, Curtis Rourke's play last year was almost as perfect as it could be if you take out the Ohio State and second half of Michigan and Notre Dame game. Like you couldn't really be any more perfect than he was, especially on third down. So for Mendoza to be able to execute at that level is going to be huge for Indiana's success this upcoming year because the supporting cast around him is just as good as anywhere in the country.
You know, Brad, I can't let you off the hook on that comment. So Curtis Rourke played a perfect season except for Ohio State, Notre Dame, and Michigan.
Take away 10 quarters of football. I mean, it's about as good as you can have it.
Because if I remember the Michigan game, they put up a couple touchdowns. He looked good, and then they kind of just grinded home the win.
Yeah, those are the only times they slowed down all year. Were those 10 quarters, and I'm not going to throw any blame around, but maybe Mendoza's the guy that gets them out of those little pickles they found themselves in offensively. I mean, toward the end of the Notre Dame game, they found some, they were taking advantage of cover 3 and 4 and whatever, but I was at that game. It was pretty. They addressed the things they needed to address, especially in the trenches, to hang with teams like that. Hang with them better than they did. Obviously, it comes down to actually getting it done,
Right, folks. I'm in the process of putting the Indiana channel link in the chat, so you have no excuses. I know we're all lazy, so you need the link. There you go. All you have to do is grab the link, and boom, just here in about 24 minutes, you've got Indiana football talk, and these guys are fun to listen to. They're knowledgeable. Great show with Brad and with Alec. All right, Brad, appreciate you being here.
Appreciate you, Mark.
Have a good show. We'll see you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. This, folks, is our first Big Ten live show here at the Voice of College Football, or at least a relaunch. I believe it's edition number 73. I went back and I was like, okay, where did we leave this off? 72, 73. So every Tuesday, 6 p.m. Eastern, Corey Brada and myself, right after the Iowa show. So I guess I didn't really think this through because I kind of forgot about taping the Michigan podcast every week, but I go directly from taping the Michigan podcast, which ended at 3:58 this week, today. And so I had to turn around, boom, for a 4:00 show, do the 4:00 live show, the college football show that you should be here for every Monday through Friday, 4 p.m. Eastern time, right into the Iowa show at 5, right into the Big Ten live show at 6. All right. Corey and I just figured it would be fun to do a Big Ten live show, and we will bring on guests every week. And now that we're into media days, it's going to be right into August camp and right into football. And so it's going to be a good time. So please join us here every Tuesday. And if Minnie is able to join us, that would be great. If she's not, that would be fine as well. Then again, it's 6:30. Okay. All right, folks, I think we will wrap it up. I don't expect any other of our attempted guests are able to make it. They're all busy at media days. So we got Minnie Hunt out there for us, of course, representing the voice of college football. We hope to get, in a lot of these cases, we'll get like these media members that had their team like the previous day. We'll get them on the next day because Ohio State, Illinois, we wanted to get reports on those two teams, and Rutgers. We were going to get some Rutgers talk in there as well. But plenty of time to talk football and prep the season in August camp here at the Voice of College Football. Appreciate you stopping by. We will see you back here on Wednesday. We already did our Ohio State live show, so if you missed that, catch that on the Buckeyes channel. You're going to see me next here at 4 Eastern on Wednesday with the College Football Show. We'll see you then. Doreen, every day at 6. Well, Doreen, way before you knew that I existed, we used to do a lot of late night call-in shows, like a lot of 10 p.m.s, midnights. And yes, people loved them. And we had a lot more people in here. And people still ask me about it and still say, Mark, whatever happened to those late night shows? And I got to kind of admit, what happened to those late night shows is that I don't feel like being on here late night. Sometimes I do. And I will jump on from time to time late at night. We will still make that happen from time to time. And of course, during the season, you're going to see me late night as well. So Doreen, thank you so much for that. And everyone, if you're not aware, Doreen and Minnie Hunt, Sunday nights, 9 p.m. Eastern time, right here at the Voice of College Football. See you on Wednesday.